Yes, George, is that you?
Hey, yes, that's me.
Hey,
Hey, Wes, how are you?
I'm doing well. Did my camera turn on?
No, we don't see you,
Hold
but
on. It's
there you go.
I'll get it to go.
Now we
There?
see you.
Ah, well,
Hello.
hello.
Welcome.
Thanks
Welcome
for
to
having
the
me.
dis welcome to the Discord session on your movie. Right on time. I think we're just going to wait for the are we good? Are we moving forward recording wise and such? Good. Okay. All right. So we're good. Weston, thank you for joining us today. My name is George Sipos. I will moderate the session of Q&A with colleagues from all over. I guess you are on the East Coast, right? Or are you you're the West Coast, right?
West Coast, yeah.
Oh, so it's nice and early over there. It's 9 o'clock, right?
Yes, exactly.
9 o'clock. I'm in St. Louis, 11 o'clock over here, still
Ah,
sipping on my coffee. And
exactly.
and a number of our colleagues are in Romania, so it's getting late on Saturday for them, probably rushing out to dates and stuff. I tell my students every time, make sure that you get to your dates on Friday and Saturday. Don't stay in class.
It's yeah, one's harder to explain than the other. So yeah, you're right.
Right. So anyway, we're happy to have you here. We're going to talk about Precarious today. Great movie. Thank you for sharing it with us at the Galactic Imaginary Festival. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. I let myself sort of be absorbed in the fantastical breaks into reality and the playful magical realism that you swirled around here and there. Letting us believe that things are real, just to find ourselves in a mesmerizing down the rabbit holes, like you say in one of the statements you made.
That's an easy statement to make. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, right. So I will let you say a couple of words about yourself, and then I'll show the official trailer of the movie for everyone. I will make a few comments after that, and we'll open it up for questions if that's all right with you, West.
That sounds great.
All right. So please tell us a little bit about yourself as we're starting the session.
That's a great question. It's always strange talking about myself. I would say that I'm living here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I'm actually on the what is it, in Emeryville, which is right across the street from Pixar. There's something
Yeah.
strange about
Yep.
being in the shadow of other people making other kind of fantastical films. And yet, yeah, I mean, I went to film school back in the day, and I've been working on shorts, animated projects with this idea of trying to create something new. And I think Precarious was the first move into taking the time and patience to sort of build up a much larger world. And so it's great that it's now done, going out into the world and getting to talk about it. So I'd say that's probably who I am.
Sorry, couldn't find a microphone fast enough. Uh, Thank you. Yes, that's great. Let me show the trailer from the website, the movie website, right, on precarious-film.com, and then we can go from there. Let's share here. There we go. All righty. So this is your website here. I'm going to make this screen large and play the trailer. All right. I will stop the streaming now, and we'll continue our conversation about the movie. So to share a few of my comments. By the way, I'm a myself. I come from literature, from narrative storytelling. So that's my let's say specialty, if you will, not just as a writer but also as a literary critic, analyst, and so on. My focus is on Japan, but having been in the United States for so long, you can't avoid delving deep into American literature and film and other means of storytelling. So I look at films as ways to tell stories, as the sort of next stage into the way in which we uh, tell stories. We started with oral stories, we moved into like written stories and writing and so on, and now here we are telling stories through visual, anywhere from camera movement to animation and so on. And you yourself, having a background in animation, obviously, I'm sure see the benefit with both modes of expression. For Precarious, I must say that I enjoyed like I said, the interesting transitions from one plane of reality to the other. There is a playful sort of um, interesting way of like switching gears, right? We see the characters operating in a similitude of reality, if you will, in a lost in 1960s, that's indicated by certain elements, the police cars and uniforms, and then the models of the motorbikes and so on and so forth. But then they slip into something else, and there's suddenly shadowed characters that shoot weird arrows from that we don't quite understand what they are, and the mysterious characters that populate the story. I mean, my favorite remains Rachel, I must say, and I felt myself a little bit sad when she disappeared from the story. I tried to understand why she's gone. I mean, why couldn't we have more of Rachel throughout the story? But I mean, that's your prerogative to take people out as you as you will. So we'll talk about Rachel in a second. I just in the movie itself, I think that the character of Henry as this strange sort of a Russian operating in America. By the way, I appreciated the truthfulness of the Russian pronunciation. It is rare in American movies to see somebody actually pronouncing Russian well. I think Andrei probably was able to speak Russian to begin
Yeah.
with, or was he just a minute? Right. That made sense. That made sense. I said, okay, well, how many people speak Russian for real in America, and we never use them in films for
Yeah.
whatever reason. So I pondered last night as I was rewatching the movie. I pondered on the title, and maybe we can start with that. The word precarious. I think questions the reality in my mind. It's a questioning of the reality. What's precarious around it is the reality, is what we take for granted. I mean, we have an assumption about things that you try to constantly turn on its head. You constantly tell us, yeah, this is the assumption that you go on, but then I'm going to take it away. This is a bed, but it's not a bed. This is a treehouse, but it's not a real treehouse. This is an arrow, but it's not an arrow. This is a mine, but it's not a mine, and so on and so forth. So can you elaborate a little bit on precariousness, on the precariousness of precarious?
Well, it's you've brought up a lot of interesting things. Uh, I guess I'll start the first place in the sense of fantasy because I feel like there's choose fantasy is such a broad term. In fact, I kind of avoid it because it feels so widely defined. That something like maybe magical realism is closer, but none of these terms really kind of get to the heart of it. By the way, on an aside, I should be talking about my own project, but seeing as though you know Japanese literature well, a guy like Haruki Murakami, there's certain novelists that really get at a sense of not fantasy as going somewhere else, but fantasy is sort of like a jazz improvisation where you're at an idea, but you don't have to tackle it directly. You can just sort of move around it, and the game of working in that area, I feel like, is not to. It's always about the audience. If as soon as the audience thinks what's going on here or why is this movie playing with me, then I feel like you've lost somebody. But at the same time, I feel like everybody wants to see something familiar yet new. So after thousands of years of people writing books, making movies, painting, finding a new way to look at something becomes, I don't know. I feel like getting to your question of what makes precarious fantasy, it isn't really about coming up with a strange new idea, but trying to feel for something that is maybe not quite realistic, but emotionally true. And every so often, it's hard to decide if something is the right answer, but somewhere in your mind, you're just like, that feels right. And it's funny because when you look back and as you're describing in the movie, you're just like, wow, that sounds really peculiar. Though my hope is that when you're watching it, and maybe it's like midnight or 1 a.m. and your mind is already sort of winding down, that you just go with it rather than try to decide what are the rules here, or how am I supposed to remember that. I don't know. I feel like how to let somebody relax when they're watching something and go with it, even if it's not um, seemingly unusual. I guess that's probably, yeah.
Right, right. No, absolutely. I think that's and that is a relaxing way to think of stories, because sometimes, that's how we think, that's how our brain works, it doesn't necessarily follow a pattern. And you hear a lot in literature, in movies, about the suspension of disbelief. And one thing that I found watching Precarious was that I didn't need to do that, because I could accept what it was without necessarily suspending my disbelief. I mean, I could accept easily somehow that, like I said, Rachel decides to push Henry through the mattress, and that not just that he's under the bed, but he's suddenly in that space in between the walls. I mean, how Alice in Wonderland is that? I'm sorry.
But
Go ahead. Yeah.
But I'll interrupt right there. I mean, I think that what the guiding principle was to make sure that there was nothing that was unreal, that there was actually that everything there could happen, but it's just if it's like if it's a story that somebody remembered and was telling back, it's a little stylized. For example, it was never covered in the story, but Rachel, the nurse, had a brother who went off to college, and that was his bedroom, and he would sneak out in the middle of the night. So rather than most people who sneak out who are going to just like tiptoe down to the front door and go out so that the dad doesn't hear them, he instead just tunneled a hole through his bed and out through the backyard, which is outlandish, but it is possible. I don't know. I feel like there's the line. As soon as something becomes magic or somebody teleports, there's part of my mind that kind of turns off because I'm just like, you know, do. And that, by the way, that's the last thing I should be saying at the Galactic Imaginarium. It's not that. I think that the story Precarious kind of holds together loosely on its own rules. So I was careful not to break it, because as soon as you break, trust is a large word, the suspension of disbelief, as soon as the audience is like, I don't know about that, it is so difficult to get them to come back. So yeah.
That's an interesting point. I have to say that for me, that moment when I first saw the moment of going through the mattress was first gasp, and then watching it again, I was like, wow, this is like thoroughly psychoanalytical, because as he's going into a hole in the mattress, I mean, does it get any more weirdly sexual than that? No, I mean, it's right there. You go through a hole into the mattress, and you're in this space in between walls, in a weird womb. And what what is on the walls? There's pictures of women, nothing, out
Right.
of place, but there's pictures of women there. And then there is this weird window that you can see through, but you cannot get out. And then there's a door that kind of cover. I mean, all this like hole in between, hole in space. I mean, all that to me was very Lacanian, was very psychoanalytical, if you will.
What's interesting about that is that I've never been to therapy, and I also haven't studied symbology or that kind of, because I feel like everybody holds it within themselves, and it's a question of accessing it. And I'm no expert in accessing it, but I feel like if you stop, I feel like the interesting part of writing was to let those aspects sort of sneak in, because to be honest, I never thought about it, but you're absolutely right that that probably came up through the subconscious as a writer, and not knowing it was probably better, because then as it shows up in the story, it becomes a little bit more authentic rather than trying to strong arm it into being quote unquote meaningful.
I absolutely agree, and I think that that's what makes it perfect. The fact that you didn't do it on purpose. I mean, if we look at what we used to call, well-written realistic literature, like if you go back to the Mimesis of Auerbach and 19th century, beginning of 20th century literature, that was the idea. You didn't want the writer to be aware of it. You didn't want the storyteller to actually be aware of what they were. You wanted them to create a reality, not necessarily that's mimicking the actual reality, but a reality that had all the potential for being real. And
Yeah.
then that would capture everything. It would capture a sexual tension. It would capture social pressure. It would capture everything. And this was a big discussion that we have at the beginning of the 20th century of why cannot, for instance, politically engaged literature capture the things that popular written literature. It's a big conversation there, because socially politically engaged literature was trying too hard. They were trying to send a message. So if you don't create that similitude of reality, you're not going to be able to. And then that's what I think, that it's brilliant what you just said now. It captures perfectly what it should be.
There's
Yeah.
one more piece that I'm just realizing now, and it's interesting that this is coming up because I've never talked about it, is if it is conscious, if you're thinking this is what I'm getting at, it can start to inform all the decisions from the start to the finish, and it can kind of narrow the scope of the story, where it's just like, well, every choice has to be about that. And by letting it be unconscious, and since we were working chronologically, it gets a little it gets a little crazy, but the characters may drift based on sort of the choices that they're making. And I feel like you can kind of tell whether characters are kind of coming into their own or whether you're pulling them back to go a particular way. And so yeah, there's something nice about not being under the umbrella of a theme where you're trying to make everything efficient to that idea.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think that there are elements in the story and some of the characters also that carry within themselves, not just Henry, but the sisters. There is a certain there's a strange appeal, sexual appeal or sexual seduction that comes through them, that is not necessarily what the goal is. They have a completely different purpose in mind, but they end up sort of acting that way, right? And conveying that particular tension.
It's funny talking about the sisters. Somebody else had asked me the question of whether the story is a dream, and that really kind of stopped me. I had to think quite a bit about it. And the reason I was thinking is that a lot of times, well, first of all, I don't see it as a dream, but I also I'm not sure I necessarily enjoy stories that are framed as a dream, because it seems like dreams are a character that's helpless underneath some sort of abstract force, some sort of whimsical force that's just acting on the character, whether it's a horror movie where there's somebody with a knife who's teleporting around and you have no control. And it seems there's no way to live through a character if you feel like they're just being put upon. But that being said, the twin sisters in the movie, how would I express this, is they get a little conceptual. They're not all powerful, but they're not meant to be engaged. You're not supposed to actually worry about what they had for breakfast. They become kind of just like this. As far as a antagonist, there's something interesting about how you can kind of loosen up the definition of what he's up against. Because he's not necessarily up against these girls. He's up against kind of an atmosphere, and that makes it sound. I don't know whoever hasn't seen the movie who's listening to this must be like, what is going on here? But it's once you loosen. I guess what I'm talking about is loosening up. I think I came across the phrase of like loosening the necktie of reality. It's not like you're going completely crazy, but just loosening some of this stuff up, I feel like opens up space. It gets a little interesting, at least I hope.
Right, right, absolutely. What I was also wondering, with the ending is surprising, right? I mean, you meant it to be surprising, I guess, that there is a reality, a crystal reality out there, or whatever, and that the sisters ultimately are part of it, and there's this infection, which I like the idea of the infection with the rock. You know, we live in an era of infection, a pandemic or whatever, and this rock permeates everything. It just goes into the humans. They're trying to bring humans under their control by shooting them with those like rock tipped or crystal tipped arrows that then they go into their bodies and so on and so forth. And correct me if I'm wrong, that's my understanding of the thing. I may be completely off here, but in the end, it is a classical story of somebody trying to escape from the control of somebody else who's trying to take control, right? And it's that that freedom or liberation, if you will, from that particular situation. Now, what remains unsaid is, and this is my question mark at the end, and I'd like to ask you that, you know, what about the father? I mean, wasn't the father then a crystal guy by then? So then when the whole crystals, he pulls the heart of the mountain or the heart of the crystal out, doesn't the father die? Isn't that like completely imploding the whole premise that he needs to help the father?
There's, I mean, you're right. It's how would I go about this? It's yeah. I mean, what happened to the father? Whether that has ramifications larger, you're absolutely right. I felt like there was a that ending really kind of comes down between him, Ruby, and kind of his trying to attain a certain. I don't know. I don't want to. I think it would be a mistake to start to analyze it because you could look this as any kind of corrupting force, and it wasn't meant to be. You know, it was meant to be literal in the fact that within this world, that which is prized has this corrupting force. But how you get rid of it, it feels like a lot of stories tend to come down to if he was able to fight this girl and beat her or kill her, and suddenly the story is resolved, that's the catharsis. And the reality is that there's never any catharsis in life. You always just sort of move on to something else. But it felt like the bittersweet, interesting ending is for him to attain control, but only for a moment, and realize that he has he has a he has another problem that's about the same size as he had when he started, but now it's just shifted to something else. And so it opens up the sequel. How's that for the business move?
Great, great. I love it. I think that's absolutely right. And you know, I also liked in the end that that as he emerges from this underground cave where the house had collapsed. I mean, I love all that symbolism. Again, I'm a literature guy, you know, so I look for all the symbols and I look for the sunken a house that becomes a womb where he emerges back up. He goes in, he comes out. You know, he's a new person, perhaps, but he holds this heart of the mountain, whatever you want to call it. But in the end, what he doesn't get, like you said, I mean, he does get a new set of issues, but what he doesn't get is the girl, right? I mean, we want a fairy tale to end up with Prince Charming marrying Cinderella, but that doesn't happen because Cinderella in this case is broken. She's just out there in pieces and destroyed, so he doesn't get the girl. What is that? What does that mean in the larger scheme? I don't know. Maybe it means a sequel, like you said. But did you have a purpose in mind when you didn't want him to get the girl? You didn't want Ruby to ultimately come around and be like, "You're my hero. You saved me. I'm not of stone anymore." No, actually, she dies because she's of stone, kind of like a Medusa uh,
Right.
stone character.
It, it's funny because there's something about, you're talking about coming from a literature perspective, how there's so much, how many symbols are being used. And you know what it's true. And I feel like the reason that it becomes enjoyable to watch is because it's within an adventure story. And so it feels like these objects are not just meant to be cherished, but everything's meant to be used. That is kind of like a machine. There's something very physical about all of it. But there's something that I really enjoy about the idea of taking any individual object, like a key or a rock, and by giving it a focus, by being able to see it, and by seeing the characters care for it, it's not that they become small characters, but I feel like they get invested with purpose. They're not just sort of unseen or used so quickly that they're not that they just become in passing, that they become charged with something. And I find that really exciting. Whether it actually means something thematically, it just feels like I don't know, again going back to the Japanese, that all of these objects are invested with spirits. And the thing is, this isn't a supernatural movie. These objects don't have spirits, but there is something about honoring the objects that are used in your life and how that just felt so right within the story.
Precisely, and as you said, Murakami Haruki, and you're looking at these characters. I mean, this is what life is ultimately, right? I mean, people come into our life and they don't necessarily have a larger role. They just come, pass by, and go. And we do the same for other people's lives. And when you place Rachel or the doctor or the police officer within that context, that all makes sense. They play that role. That I didn't want Rachel to die. That's a completely different story, but that's my investment with her as a character, because she starts as being very compelling, and I wouldn't have wanted to lose her. I would have wanted her maybe to be the sidekick in a different way than the journalist whose name I forget now. So anyway, let's then open up the conversation to Q&A, so we have other colleagues join us and have an opportunity to talk with you.
Hi. Thank you. I have seen the movie actually, and I would like to take a different approach and a different perspective towards it. Because for me, while watching this movie, the production, the way it's built, the way the story is built and told, screamed from the beginning to the end, Pulp Fiction, and that's great. And I believe it's a very good thing that somebody still tries to encapsulate and to produce content which is it's referential. For instance, because it happens in the 50s and somewhere in the 50s or the 60s, the way it's filmed, the way the shots merge with each other, the way the camera sometimes stares onto characters, and the meaning and the way the story develops talks to me in a sort of Twilight Zone kind of way. And this is where the suspension of disbelief intervenes, because as you've said, it's fantasy, or it has fantasy elements, but it also happens in real time. Now, if you remember, Twilight Zone did exactly that. At the beginning of each program, they said don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your television. Practically, it's just a figment of reality, which is a weird reality, which we are showing it to you. And furthermore, it's in that realm of pulp fiction, as for me, the pictures of the woman from the tunnel do not necessarily speak of psychoanalysis, but more of the pathway to this different reality, which is not meant necessarily for all viewers, for all participants, but for the sort of younger generation, younger public, which can understand and assimilate this sort of fantastic world. Because let's face it, we as teenagers had pictures of young women on our walls, right? So it's for me, it was a tunnel intended to go into a realm of imagination, which is intended for teenagers, for young people, for those who are just about to discover the world and the magic around it. And lastly, because people might be wondering or asking themselves, okay, what are the crystals, what is their purpose, what are they doing, what are they intended for? I would say that the point of the crystals, at least in my honest opinion, is there isn't necessarily a need to explain the purpose of the crystals. They are, and going back to Pulp Fiction, this time the movie, they are just like the suitcase from Tarantino, from the movie Pulp Fiction. We wonder what is in the suitcase, why is it so important? But in the end, it doesn't matter. The suitcase triggers the action. Here, this sort of enveloped mystery of the crystals, which is never fully explained, is the one that pushes the characters to act in their own way, which is a bit different from the real world, and it makes for a great atmosphere, and it hooks you right till the end. So yeah, I had no question actually. I just really liked the movie, and I wanted to share my experience with it and my interpretation with it. I'm not sure if it's entirely correct or in any way correct, but that's how I've perceived it, as that sort of Sunday morning Twilight Zone sort of. You're a kid, you're a teenager, you like paranormal, you like fantasy, you adore this sort of strangeness of the world that might happen, and then you get hooked by it and sucked in your TV, which is has nothing wrong with it. So yeah, thank you for the experience.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was just expecting a question, but it is actually it is very fulfilling to get to hear. I mean, especially in this day and age where it's not possible to go, where everything is online. It's difficult to know what, if any, effect the story has on different people. Where there's some people get infuriated by not getting all the answers, or other people enjoy the room for interpretation. So to be able to hear how it landed on you isn't a matter about whether it's correct or not, but that was a fantastic sense of what you got out of it. So thank you. I'm trying to think of, well, there's two things that I'll say about that I find interesting is this idea of Twilight Zone, of like sort of entering in another world. It's interesting that within like literature, there's the idea of, well, how do we get in there? Do we go in through a wardrobe? Do we go down a rabbit hole? And I feel like maybe the opening credits was the first attempt at sort of, in a very slow way, just saying, hey, we're going to go somewhere else, so you can kind of stop thinking about where we're at, when we're at, or the things that you're thinking about, or even the bed. But since the whole world was built and it wasn't built well, because there weren't, it is, those rooms aren't built to code. But there's also an idea of how do we make this almost cardboard thin, where you don't, there's a world outside of the shot, but you don't really feel like it's really fully fleshed. It almost feels like this little bubble that might just sort of pop at any moment, and that kind of lends itself to the pressure of kind of getting to the end of the story or something happening, because you're like, I don't know how long this atmosphere can like hold itself together. That was kind of exciting, and that's why, I mean, it's enjoyable to be able to build things, because then you can play around and you can tear holes into walls, things that you can't do in the real world. But it does give you that sort of like a slightly unreal. By the way, there's a short story, I think it's Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House, where there's a description of the haunted house as being a fully, just a mansion wherever, but that the architects, that everything was like maybe 1 degree off, and you could, if you looked at any part of this building, you're like, it looks right, but it just doesn't quite feel right. And so there's something enjoyable that as we were building, there was no measurements, there was no architectural plans, that it looked right, but whether it just doesn't quite feel, it's like something about this place doesn't feel like that it would happen in the real world, was an enjoyable pursuit to create that atmosphere, I guess. And then I'm trying to think if there was anything. Oh, anyway, on a side note, the crystals and all of that, I think that it's true. There's a lot of stories where you don't need to know what the treasure is, because there's a lot. I mean, how would I go about this? Like if you have a heist movie, the valuables, the money, the jewels may have a very complicated story of how they all came to be, but this character only just wants to get it. And so it's interesting where you draw the line, where you're like, I don't need to know everybody's plans or how everything came together, just the need of the main character. So, yeah.
Great. Yes, thank you. Anyone else would like to ask Weston a question or discuss or comment, share their feelings about the movie? I mean, not in general.
I have another question, and this time it's really a question, and it goes towards production value and production, let's call it hardship. So the movie feels and seems quite authentic, and it goes to great lengths to reproduce that sort of atmosphere and everything to seem from that age and time. So how did you accomplish that? How hard was it to gather all the objects, the cars, the house, everything to make sense in that time period, which is, I believe, I don't know, 50s, 60s, somewhere around there.
Sure. That's the it's funny. It's like I mean, it's a good question. I'll tell you here in a second, but it's interesting how it was made, because I live in a loft building, and so there's maybe a central room. It's actually where I'm here, right in the middle of it. That's maybe 4 meters by 4 meters by probably 4 meters cube. And when I started, I had these ideas floating in my head, and I was just like, I need to do it somehow, and I don't know what's possible. And so it was just me and this woman, Louise Franco, who's the art director. And it's like, well, what can I build in this space? And so for next to no money, we just started building. I would build, it's one set at a time. There's only room for one set. And so I would build the wood framing and then cover it in some sort of foam or cardboard. I mean, a lot of this stuff you can't even lean against. It is just the most, it is the minimally effective build. And once that was in place, and the art director would start dressing it, again with found objects, or again, a lot of this stuff was not, there's only a couple of things that were purchased. It is remarkably inexpensive, but it was the type of story that didn't need a lot of money. What this story needed was a lot of time. So taking 7 years, it's you can do a lot in 7 years. I mean, it could have been done a lot faster, but I feel like a lot of the ideas wouldn't have had time to marinate as much, and you could have bought a lot of objects. But at the same time, all of those police cars were toy models that were, 2 inches. So there was never no object that was going to get in the way of doing it. I mean, so yeah, I'm trying to think of how to describe. It really was just a sense of ambition. I mean, for example, the treehouse. We're like, well, we could go outside and try to find one, but actually building it doesn't seem like a good idea at first. But then once you do it, you're like, you know what? That worked surprisingly well. So, yeah, and there's also just there's an incredible joy. Once time is so great, and so few people feel like they can allow themselves that amount of time. Because I was my own cinematographer, there was never a team of people that were getting expensive. And so once you have sort of like a very small family, and they all really enjoy what they're doing, and you're able to weave around their other schedules, then it was actually a luxury to be able to assemble it. But it is a little intense, always moving forward, never being able to go back, because once a set is torn down, you're never going to rebuild it. So it's a single direction story, which is actually kind of exciting. The idea of continuing to push into new territory.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you as well, Weston. Are there any other questions that we would like to discuss about Precarious today? If not, I will once again thank Wes for his time today and for submitting the movie to the festival. I think it brought a tremendous contribution to the types of submissions we had in the festival. Like I said, enjoyed tremendously watching the movie, and I think it brings something fresh, as you intended, and you declare in your statements on other venues that you wanted to bring a fresh view outside of CGI and computer-based graphics and all that, and return to sort of like the good old days of shooting model cars, like you said, and cardboard boxes and so on. And I think that is refreshing indeed. And it's not. I mean, maybe I'm older, I guess, and it doesn't matter that much to me. I didn't miss it because the story took over, and because the story brought me in, and that's what I cared about. I don't care about robots moving up and down necessarily, and animations doing different things. So, once again, thank you so much, Wes, for joining us this morning. Oh, well, already, morning for you, I guess, still. And we wish you luck in your future productions. We're looking forward to seeing more. That's for sure.
I've been a little, I've been a little slow waiting for the world to come back to normal, but then I realized can't wait for the rest of the world. Have to just jump in and make it happen. So, how do you forgive my terrible pronunciation? Mulțumesc, George, and it has been a tremendous honor, and it's been great questions. So thank you so much.
Perfect. We appreciate it. Thank you as well, Weston.
All right.
Now.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.